Hello and welcome to another installment of our Lean Focus webinar series. Today's webinar is entitled Driving Results with New Product Launch Control Rooms. And in a moment, I will introduce you to our panelist, George Ellis. But before we do, I'd like to cover some housekeeping notes. Next. This information is proprietary to Lean Focus. This presentation is not to be shared with anyone outside your organization, and we ask that you please respect our copyright rights in this instance. Next. A few housekeeping notes. All participants will be placed in listen-only mode in the GoToWebinar. There are 4 handouts that are available in the GoToWebinar handout display panel. If you click on those, you can download those handouts during this webinar. There will be an opportunity for questions and answers at the end of today's webinar. There is a questions control panel in the GoToWebinar feature where you can type in your questions, and I will moderate those questions at the end of today's webinar to the panelist. And a recording will be made of this webinar, which will be emailed to all registrants, regardless of whether or not they participated live or after the fact. Please look for this recording or this email in your inbox at least about a day later after the conclusion of this webinar. If it is not in your inbox, it is quite possible that it arrived into your spam folder. So check your spam folder and add us to your approved senders list or recipients list so that that doesn't happen the next time. Next. A little bit about Lean Focus. So Lean Focus, our focus is to build high performance cultures with our clients. And we believe that that takes 3 components. Driven leaders who are steeped in Lean tools and lead with the right behaviors in order to drive the transformation inside their organization. They subscribe to a set of guiding principles that shape the Lean journeys that they're on. And they utilize proven systems and tools and able to capture value creation inside of their companies. All of this should result in sustained profitable growth year over year for the organizations that embark upon these Lean journeys. Next. We're broken down into 8 practice areas. The practice area that we'll be focused on today is the innovation practice, which is led by George Ellis, who will introduce himself in a moment. You can see all the other 8 practices that we work with our clients in these areas. When we're doing a total Lean transformation, it's quite often the case that we're working across all 8 of these areas simultaneously. Next. And just a brief sampling of some of the clients that we've worked and helped contribute to their Lean journeys. As you can see, the industries are pretty vast and diverse in terms of the types, sizes, publicly held, privately held companies, med device, industrial. The common frame being here, all of these companies have a leadership team that embraces Lean as the way that they're going to drive sustainable process improvement over time. Next. And how we help our clients achieve that value creation is through the utilization of tools, one of which we're going to talk about today, which is the Launch Control Room tool, which resides inside of the innovation system as part of growth. But as you can see, the system at Lean Focus is quite comprehensive and covers the entire life cycle of what you would expect to do in order to drive value creation inside of a business, from organic growth to margin expansion to working capital improvement, and also people and culture and talent. And this is the tools that we utilize with our clients. Next. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you to today's panelist, George Ellis, who is the leader of our innovation practice. George, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Damon. I always appreciate the introduction. Hey, for everybody that's here, I'm always excited to have a chance to share how to apply Lean in different parts of innovation. My history is that I spent almost all my career in R&D, first as an individual contributor, and then as a leader. I grew to be able to be the global vice president of X-Rite which was an operating company of Danaher, and it was really there that we applied the Lean principles like in full court press everywhere. We were applying Lean to innovation, and just watching that transformation was amazing. Watching how that team, the engagement surveys went up. We had fewer people left the company voluntarily. Our projects were coming in on time. We were hitting our revenue targets. We won an innovation award. That the group that won it was the first time they had won anything like that. So watching Lean come in, it was basically the same people. But what I watched was by getting the waste out that Lean gets rid of, you can let these amazing people in product development and innovation, you can let them be the amazing people that they're really able to be. You know, when I deal with people in innovation, you're talking about somebody who's been years to school. Very often they've been even decades working in their technical area or in marketing. And so they're very talented people, they're very driven. And so all we need to do is just take the waste away, and we can watch how performance just rockets. For me, it was an elixir, and so I wanted to do this full time. So I did a few years in the Danaher Business Systems Office when we spun the dental group off, and I was the vice president for innovation in that group. I had an opportunity to join Damon, and now I get to do this stuff every single day. It's a fantastic job. It's a dream job, and you know, I think there's something so satisfying about taking waste away so people can be that person that they were meant to be, go home winners, and you know, all that's pretty exciting to me. That's why I do this. And now in today's talk, we already got an introduction. Let's talk a little bit about, you know, what's the problem we're trying to solve. If you've ever been to any of my other webinars, you know, I always begin with what's the problem we're trying to solve. And then I want to talk a little bit about the symptoms, problems, and root cause tree that you may have seen before and how it applies to launch control room. And then we'll talk a little bit about value and waste, which is not very intuitive for most innovation people. And then we'll go into, you know, a lot of the specifics on launch control room and on how how you can use it at your company to improve your launch success. And then we can talk, and then we'll go into next steps. The first thing I want to say about innovation is complex. Anybody that thinks it's easy doesn't understand it, because it goes all the way from over here on the left where you're segmenting, maybe even you're segmenting a new market, you're mapping out an IP strategy, way early stuff, all the way down to where you're picking the projects you're going to work on, and then you're figuring out how you're going to define those projects so you don't have that terrible scope creep, and so you create products that people really love. That's what Discover's all about, and design is all about execution. This is where you're spending your money, and this is what we want to do really well. And then we deploy and get those products out in the market. And you know, I say to you might be thinking, oh, this is for marketing people. No, it's not. This is for marketing. It's for R&D. It's for everybody in the innovation journey. After all, if you're an amazing scientist and engineer, or an amazing project engineer, and you create an incredible product, but it doesn't create value, what good have you done? And how satisfied will you be with that? So for me, the job is not done until we have put the product in the customer's hand and we have seen them be satisfied, and that's what launch control room is all about. So this whole innovation journey at Lean Focus, we talk about the entire journey, which is, you know, between 5 and 10 years for most companies, longer for some. But today, we're just going to talk about launch control room. So the first thing I want to say is, like, does this work? And so here's one study that we did with about a $3 billion med dev company. They were pretty broad. They had a lot of different kinds of products. We looked at, we studied 30 launches, and we measured revenue attainment. So revenue attainment is a measure I'm really behind for new products. Revenue attainment is, hey, when you came and said, I'm going to do this project way back when, whatever it was, a year and a half, 2 years, sometimes more, how much revenue did you say we were going to get when it launched? Now, maybe it was late and maybe things happened, but from the day of launch, how much revenue did we get? So if we lay out the actual revenue we got from the day we launched compared to what we said it would do, how did we do? And when we did this study of 30 launches that were conducted over 3 years by multiple groups, and I feel like we were very fair here. We didn't have a lot of, I think we were very objective in how we did the measurements, and we just said, did you use some sort of revenue attainment measure? Did you have some kind of process and control? It didn't have to meet our guidelines. You know, we didn't set the bar so that all the ones we liked made it in and all the ones we didn't. But I think we included if there was any kind of revenue attainment process used. And what we saw is when there wasn't, we were getting about 40% of projected revenue. Okay, so when we said way back when the project started, we were, for every dollar we said we were going to get, we got 40 cents. But for the projects in this study that had some sort of process around revenue attainment, they got 80%. I mean, what a tremendous difference! Double they doubled the revenue they got, and and when you see the 80%, I can tell you I've deployed it. One company I'm thinking about, we deployed the process very close to what I'm about to show you. We got my last year working with that company, they were at 102%. So 80 is not the limit; it's just the average in this study. So I mean, I look at this and I just say, does it work? Yes, I've watched it work, and so that's why that's why I'm such a believer in managing that whole launch process. So now I want to talk a little bit about symptoms, problems, and causes. And the reason I do that is because anytime in Lean, when we talk, we want to have a very clean understanding of which we're talking about. A lot of people talk about things that are going wrong and they intermix all these, and they're not the same thing. It's very important to know the difference when you're talking. So a symptom, well, let's take a symptom. I'm tired, I've got cold chills, I've got a headache. Those are things that are obvious, I feel them, but they're very hard to measure. Now, the problem that's quantifiable is you've got a fever of 103 degrees in Fahrenheit. And what's the root cause? The root cause is, in my case last year, it was a perforated appendix. Now, the difference is symptoms are obvious but hard to measure. Problems are measurable, root causes are addressable. So when you guys are thinking about what's wrong at your company, be sure that you spread your thoughts out clearly in these, because these are the ones we can attack directly. So and so now let's apply this kind of thinking to launch to product launch. Now I want you guys to imagine we've launched a product. It's not a perfect product, okay? So there's so many folks that when they launch a product, it doesn't do well, and they talk about all the flaws in the product, and then they say, let's go do a new one. That one's no good. We made this mistake and that. Let's go, let us just start over and we'll go do a new product, and the next one's going to be great. I totally do not believe in that approach. We want to get all the value for our customers and for our company out of the product we just launched. And it's very easy to look at a product, pick out a couple of features and say they're not right and start over, versus really understanding what's wrong, because a lot of these issues are correctable. I've looked at this issue, I think in depth. I would say I can think of, right off the top of my head, 3 or 4 times where I looked into really bad launches and found out that, yeah, the product wasn't perfect. It never is. But about half of the problems weren't really related to the basic structure of the product. They were easy things to fix. In other words, about half of the problems when we left revenue out and our revenue attainment, about half of them were issues that could be corrected in the product easily, or they weren't even related to the product. So we want to really understand the root causes. So what are the symptoms? The product disappointed customers. We don't understand why they don't like it. They're just not buying it. Sales is bogged down with quality issues. You guys ever had this? You release a new product, you go see sales, they got in trouble with their customer who's yelling at them because there's a quality issue. Now they don't want to sell it to anybody else because they don't need that kind of trouble, so they just keep selling the old product. We missed our launch commitments, and now customers who we told we'd have it, they're, now we tell them it's coming again, they don't believe us, they're disappointed, maybe they even go to a competitor. We have these promises of growth way back when the company hands over the money to do the project. I bet you know this problem. The company gives us might be 500,000, might be 5 million to go develop a product, and we have all these promises of growth, and then the growth doesn't come. And what do the people who manage the money think about when you come back and ask for more? And then for quality and manufacturing issues, it just takes too long to solve. It takes us forever to get these things corrected, and we don't know why. So these are symptoms. These are things we feel. They're very hard to quantify. What we can quantify is what's our revenue attainment. And one thing I hope you'll all carry away from this talk, if you don't carry away anything else, is measure revenue attainment on every product. It's really important to get a measure. Just go back and look at those early project documents, lay out what you said you were going to get for the first 2 years or so. maybe 3, and then map out what you got. Did you get 100% of it, 50%? And then look at your whole portfolio. It's one of the things we teach. And of course, it's a lean it's a fundamental lean concept that you always measure. So, what are some of the root causes? Now, remember, the root causes are hidden, right? They're underground, but there are things that we can directly address. There are things like the perforated appendix. We can fix them. So one of them is we don't have a formal team doing problem solving. This is so common. We launch a product, it's not doing well. We all sit around in the conference room and talk about how sad we are, think about the next project, but we don't really dive in and really solve those problems. Another one is we don't have the ability to go to Gemba for sales, and I'll talk a lot about this later on. And then there's also there's no plan or process. There's no process to plan how we resource things that are coming after launch. For example, if you're doing a global launch, do you really launch to the whole world on one day? Probably not. You probably launch in one market, get established. There's another market coming, especially if you're in a regulated industry. But even if you're not, you've still got supply chain issues to set up. You've got customer-facing people to train. Very few people release a product worldwide on the same day. And what happens in a lot of companies is we get that big launch out, that one we're thinking about. Usually it's North America or Western Europe. And then all the other ones, they kind of get lost as the team dissipates, and now sustaining people are expected to take care of those big jobs. Another one is no structured means to measure or drive product revenue. I just talked to you about that one. Measure revenue attainment, drive it, problem solve it. You'll be amazed how much you'll learn about this product, and you can use it on the next product. We'll talk about that a little more. And finally, we don't really have standards in manufacturing for new products, so we don't really understand how we're performing and what we need to do. So these are the things that Launch Control Room deals with. Now, one thing I want to do is I want to just back up. If I look at the entire innovation journey, that picture I showed you right in the beginning, that one that I said goes from 5 to 10 years, there are different root causes in every one of those areas. So the one thing I want to tell you is whenever we're in lean thinking, we hone in on an area and we go find the root cause. And I just wanted to give you some examples of the kinds of things that we would do. So these are like the ones we're talking about right now, but they're very different ones. And every time you have a problem, it's important to look at the root causes differently. That's why we look at the whole journey, all the way from segmentation, all the way out to product launch and sustainment. Taiichi Ohno, the father of the Toyota production system, in fact, it was called the Ohno production system at Toyota for its first years because Toyota wasn't sure. I want to say that was in the 40s. But he said, if our root cause is off by just a little bit, our countermeasures will be totally ineffective. So this is a whole lean thinking process. And I just want to make sure you guys understand, this is just one example of what we do in lean thinking. We do this all the time in different places. So let's talk a little bit about value and waste. I said a little bit earlier that people in innovation don't think of the world like this. It's intuitive to think, hey, effort, that's my brain power, right? We're in innovation. We're not actually making products. We're transforming information. We're listening to a customer, creating a product spec. We're taking a product spec and creating design documents. We're taking design documents and then converting them to test procedures. We transform information. Peter Drucker coined the term knowledge worker back in the 1960s. And, so what we're doing, we think of effort and we get confused between effort and value. Effort is how busy we are. Value is what we create that customers want. And a lot of people think they're the same thing, but I assure you they are not. Waste is the difference. So every time we apply effort, and it doesn't create value, it's waste. And one of the axioms of lean thinking is we want to always divide what we do into how much is waste and how much is value. Now, most people in innovation, if you ask them, and if you ask me, in fact, I remember very clearly when I heard this talk the first time, it was many years ago, but I remember it, that waste is typically about 90% of what we do, which is scary to think about. It's waste is, it's as I say here, the second one is it's large. So, this one, maybe 85% is waste. It's some number like this. Jeffrey Liker, a quote from him in the Toyota way, is 90% of almost all business processes are waste. And I love Taiichi Ohno's quote down here. If you're going to do Kaizen continuously, you've got to assume that things are a mess. So waste is large. And it's frustrating. You know, if I go on a factory floor and I want to see waste, it's easy. Where do I look? Inventory, scrap, work in progress. Go walk a factory floor. People who are good at it can walk a factory floor, and in a few minutes, they have a very good sense of where the waste is. We can't do that in innovation because all this is in our heads, right? It's all knowledge. Where are you going to look? And so what I look for is waste. When I see an engineer or a marketer frustrated that a product doesn't get out on time, that we can't get approvals, that we aren't going out and talking with our customers, that our customers are frustrated because we didn't do what they wanted, and that frustrates us, all of those things tell me that's the way to see waste. It's hidden. It hides in plain sight. Of course it does. If we saw it, we'd get rid of it. It's systemic. You know, W. Edward Deming said that he said a bad system will beat a good person every time. And I think this is a Leiker quote, or maybe a little rephrase from Jeffrey Leiker. Most waste is created by good people trying to do the right thing. And you know, I will say that waste is destructive. Every time we spend time creating waste, we're not doing something that could be invested in innovation, expertise, things that are satisfying and that delight our customers and our stakeholders. Now, a lot of times when people see waste and things aren't moving fast enough, what does the boss do? He comes and pushes harder, right? Tells you, hey, I want everybody to try harder. We've got to get it done somehow. You guys know the talk, right? Like, just make it happen, that sort of thing. And we can push, and when we push our system to run harder, we'll get more value. You might get that project out a little earlier, but because you're just driving a wasteful system harder, this bump in effort gives you a bump in value, but it also gives you a proportionate bump in waste. It's not sustainable. You can't push people in a wasteful system and think you're going to get long-term improvements. You know, look, I'm all for pushing. If you have a product, there's a show coming up next week, we need to push. Okay, fine, we'll do that for a week or two, but you can't do this all your working life. It's fleeting. This is what lean thinking teaches. Let's cut waste. When we cut waste, we'll leave time for value. And here's the cool thing. Let's say that you agree with this axiom. And by the way, I'm totally on board. Leiker says 90%. I generally say 85. I've heard 80. The numbers from almost all lean consultants are what we do is between 80 and 90% waste. But think of it, if 15% of what we do contributes value, if we can just cut waste from 85% to 70%, which doesn't sound that hard, right? Like over 3 years, then we could double the amount of effort, right? Because our value would go from 15 to 30. Guys, I've watched this happen. I've watched teams get twice as much done because they cut waste and they're happier while they're doing it. So this is what made me, I was telling you about this at the beginning, this is what made me such a believer in the application of lean to innovation. And in innovation, the problem is waste hides and people get defensive. They don't want to talk about it. You know the talk, you know, they blind you with science. You go see your scientist, you know, and they give you like a 25-page PowerPoint on why this project is late or why we can't do the technology. And it's all so complicated you couldn't understand. But the truth is, when we look inside the way the machine works, most of the waste is simple. I'm not saying technical things aren't hard. They are hard. It takes them, but most of the time in innovation, we have amazing people that do those things. And if we can just get things like poor planning and bad communication and poor approvals and not problems and failing to problem solve or manage, do daily, what we call daily management. You know, for us, it's usually weekly in innovation, but we call it daily management. You know, you get all kinds of waste that's easy to cure. So those big brain people, those talented marketers, they can go be the amazing people they're meant to be, and they can go solve those tough problems. But the waste we're going to work on is, like I said, this waste that's hidden. So now, what is launch control room? Well, you know, in R&D, you know, I'm an R&D guy. I grew up in that world, and of course, we all have heard the saying that if you build a better mousetrap, the world will be the door to your path. And you know, that's not how it is, of course. The truth is that we have to really support customers through a chain of value. So I want to talk about, like, I might have a great product. So I'm an R&D guy. I'm a product marketer who created an amazing product spec. I have an amazing product. And so that great product is the beginning of the chain. Absolutely. You've got to have a good product to start with. But I've got to have supporting functions out there: customer service, field service, applications engineering. I've got to have partners out there. I've got to have distributors. I've got to have sales reps. that help me sell that product. I've got to have the ability to transact business. I've got to have my whole MRP system, my e-com system built so that I can accept orders. I've got to have commercial assets that tell the story of my product to many, many people. And I've got to have training and education so people know how to use the product right. All of these things are in the chain to get to our customer. One break in this chain breaks the value. Now, I want to give you an example from my personal life. So this is a device that I am so grateful to the people from KCI who invented it and 3M who really got it to market. It's a wound care machine, and what it does, it keeps a vacuum on a wound. And when I had that perforated appendix, I had this thing help me heal in about 6 weeks. A wound that would normally take 6 months to heal, healed in 6 weeks. Incredible product. No infection, just 5 times, 1/5 the time to healing. And, I will tell you, it healed up the first time, and I've been 100% for, within 2 months, I was at 100%. But it was more than a great product. 3M, they acquired KCI, the company that developed it, so they could do distribution. They had to talk to a surgeon, and they had to convince a surgeon who would order it for me. There was local home health care because this device is complicated to change. Every couple of days, a nurse has to change it, and it takes some training. So a nurse would come to my house and change out the device. Took about 20 minutes, but the people who deployed this device, they got it all over, at least all over the U.S. I don't know where else they're selling it, and they just gave me 3 numbers to call of different companies that covered my area, and I had somebody. Insurance covered it as a rental. That takes negotiation with the insurance company. There's a 2-hour courier replacement because if this thing fails, you have to replace it within 2 hours, or there's some rework you have to do around the wound. And so they have 2-hour replacement. I live in a rural part of Virginia. There was somebody within 45 minutes of me. If I call them at 2 in the morning, they guarantee they're there at my house at 4 in the morning. And then they had Internet of Things monitoring. So one time I turned my machine off to change out a part of it, and I got a phone call immediately. What's going on? Is everything okay? Guys, it's a whole chain of value that was required to bring that to me. And if any one of those links were missing, I wasn't getting the value. This is what Launch Control Room monitors. The great product, that comes out of the development. Now, we may make some tweaks to the product as we learn about it, but this is the product we have to sell. But all these other things, these are the kinds of things we want to make sure they're all working. So let's talk about it. What are the things that happen in Launch Control Room what is it? It's typically a virtual space. It can be a physical space, but usually with Launch Control Room, you're very tightly connected with the sales group, and they're almost always distributed. And what we want is a cross-functional team. That means we need to have a representative from manufacturing, at least one from R&D, maybe one from application engineering. It depends on your product. And product marketing is probably leading this. Maybe you have somebody from regulatory. It depends on the product, but you need a cross-functional team that is capable of understanding, like when we see a break in the chain, we're able to actually go find which link. We meet weekly to very quickly. We're talking 20, 30-minute meetings here. If nothing's wrong, that's all that we invest in it. So you might be thinking, oh gosh, another meeting, how can I handle it? But it's a short meeting, and we just close gaps with problem solving. When we're not hitting our revenue or other goals, we stop and we go figure out what's wrong and we fix it. And I'm going to give you some examples of that as we talk more. And they report directly to leadership. How are we doing? So, I want you to think about a launch that needs, there's a launch that comes out, but the first hurdle we come into is we find out the sales team is poorly trained. It turns out we did a virtual training. Nobody really paid attention. There was no test. There was no mock sales sessions. There was no accompanying with people. A lot of times you'll have a sales manager accompany a sales rep to a sales call to review how well they're doing. We didn't do any of that. So our sales team wasn't trained. Okay, we just found that. We fixed it because of Launch Control Room. We found it fast. I'll talk to you about how we do that. Then there was a quality defect problem in manufacturing. We found it fast. As soon as customers were disappointing, we were banging on the door in manufacturing. We have a manufacturing team member in our Launch Control Room, so we're very fast to fix it. We don't have commercial assets in French, it turns out. We were really depending on France and the French part of Belgium for sales. For this product, it's a place where we had a good hold, and we're not getting it. Why? We didn't create the assets. Well, we have a marketing person on the team. We can address it. And then we wind up with a half-baked feature that disappointed a clinician, and we're able to go right to the R&D guy and say, what's the workaround? How can we do something that helps with this? You see the idea? We're just constantly looking at the data. We're problem solving wherever it is in the product. We've got a team that can pull others in to keep on track and keep this and make this product so it delivers value to our customers. So this is a typical product launch team. In the middle, like I said, you're almost always driven by product marketing. But you may have 3 people on the team, or you may have 5, depending on the complexity of the product, how new it is for your organization. But the point is, nothing will get by this team because you're going to be practicing what we call daily management. And I'll talk to you about that in just a few minutes. So how does all this work? So I come in, I start measuring, how am I doing with revenue attainment? How's my manufacturing working? Like, for example, what are warranty returns? What are out-of-the-box failures? What's OTD? And then how am I doing with my regional launches? These are the 3 main areas that we're measuring to see how we're doing. Okay, and if we look and there's a gap, we can see something's wrong and we got to fix this. So how do we fix this? Well, we use problem-solving tools, which again, they'll come up in a few minutes. We use something called a QDC tracker, where with a microscope, we watch how we're doing with QDC for this product, not mixed in the whole company's products, but just for the product we're tracking. Because remember, a new product can have a very different experience in manufacturing than an existing product. So we need to track it separately. And then 8 minutes at Gemba, that's a tool where we can go out and see how well our value prop is being received by our customers, and if it's getting them and if they're accepting it. And that's a process called 8 minutes at Gemba that's coming up in just a minute. The point is, we look at data, we experiment, we look at data, we see what the problem, we measure the problem, we come in and we find root cause, like I was talking to you a few minutes ago. We work our way down that tree, find the root cause, put in countermeasures, and we close those gaps and we fix it. And that's what Launch Control Room is. It's a structured, problem-solving, cross-functional team applied to launching a new product, I would say the most intently over the first 6 to 9 months of that launch, so that we find stuff fast. Now, this is really from Eric Ries. I borrow this from him. That's why his book is in the corner there, The Lean Startup. But we can sit around the conference room and philosophize the way Aristotle did about gravity, and think and think and think real hard. And when really smart people think, they still get it wrong all the time. But how do we really learn? Experiment. After Galileo did 6 months of experiments with different surfaces and different angles, measuring fall rate, he was able to demonstrate that light objects and heavier objects fall at the same rate absent air friction. So the point is, the human race was stuck in this for 2 millennia because they didn't go out and do the experiment. Launch Control Room is all about getting to this experiment fast versus sitting around the conference room table guessing about how bad things are. So I want to talk to you now, what is problem solving? And I talk about it because a lot of people in innovation, R&D and marketing, they think problem solving is something we do on the factory floor. Oh, you're not, you had a quality defect, you got to go solve that problem. But I want you to think of not hitting our revenue attainment. That's just a different kind of defect, right? We said in the beginning, we thought we were going to do X. We actually did half X. What happened? We need to go problem solve that. So how do we do that? Well, we use something called the Short cycle, sometimes called the Deming cycle, called plan, do, check, act. And every week we get together and we see how the revenue's doing. And in the beginning here, you can see the revenue's doing pretty good. The red line's tracking the blue line. The gray line is last year's. This blue line is our target, and our red line is what we expected. It's going pretty good, but bam, we hit 1 week and it's going horribly. Well, now we need to act because we have a gap. And you can see that the gap of what we think we're going to get is way below what we thought we were going to get. In fact, you can see the gap is measured, is how we look at the gap is, we're sitting down here. We wanted to be up here. So how are we going to get back on track? Well, we want to stop and fix. This is another tenet of lean thinking. Don't just drive on through with a faulty system. That's like taking a bad machine and just making bad parts to fix them later. What we want to do is find out what's wrong with our machine, and our machine is getting our product into our customers' hands. So there's 2 parts to that, right? One of them is getting the value prop to the customer so they make a favorable decision. And the second one is once they've made that favorable decision, they've made that purchase, we get the product in their hands and satisfy them. So that's a machine. And anytime we fail to do that, that's a gap. That's a gap we want to solve. So the first thing we do is we get together and we break apart, where is the problem happening? Is it a regional problem? Like, are we doing really well in certain parts of the country and not others, or in some countries but not others? We might break it apart by different kinds of customers. Like if I have a medical device, I'm really not doing well with hospitals, but I'm doing fine with doctors' private practices. Or maybe I've got 5 part numbers that I'm releasing at one time, from the the basic model to the fully built model. Maybe the basic model is doing fine, but the really decked out model is doing terribly. When we try to break things out by where the problem is, we look in different dimensions till we start seeing a strong Pareto like this. And so you might experiment here a little bit. And this is what we teach. Try different ways to split this data up. It's easy, right? It's those 3 examples I just gave you. Very easy to divide the problem up along those. When I'm trying to find out where a problem happened, it's a very small amount of effort. Now let's talk about why it happened. So the first thing we want to do is go through and do what's called a 5 whys. You may have heard of this on the factory floor and be thinking, oh, this doesn't apply to me. This is on the factory floor. No, that's not right. It applies to you too. You see, all of us walk into a problem with assumptions and biases, and we don't see the errors in our work, and we never will. If you don't hear a certain frequency, it doesn't matter how hard you listen, you're not going to hear it. If you don't see well, no matter how hard you stare, you're not going to see it. How do we fight this problem with biases and assumptions? Well, we get a team together. And it's a very simple process. It's amazingly simple what you can do in 20 minutes. So we get our cross-functional team together and we ask the 5 whys. What are the 5 whys? And by the way, sometimes it's 4, sometimes it's 7, roughly it's 5. But why did we miss revenue? Because hospitals aren't buying it. Why aren't hospitals buying it? Because it doesn't fit in because they feel it doesn't fit in a high volume environment like you might see in a hospital lab versus a low volume environment you see in a doctor's office. Why doesn't it fit in a high volume environment? Because our cycle time is too slow. Why is our cycle time too slow? And finally, we get down to our cycle time is 15 minutes. We thought that was good enough. We didn't have a process to go interview hospitals because we focused so much on doctor's offices. We thought we had it, and 15 minutes wasn't good enough for the hospital. So what's the 5 why? Well, the 5 why always ends in process miss, process fail, process ignored. It's never a person's fault. It's never resources. It's never I didn't have time. And in this case, we didn't have our process did not have us looking at our full demographic. So we go through and take every one of these failures and we bucket them. This is the bucket where I didn't have let's say this blue one is the bucket where I didn't have the right process for getting customer data. Maybe the yellow one is I didn't have a process for managing on-time delivery to meet the customer's demands. Maybe the green one is I didn't have literature done in a language I needed. You see what I mean? We take these and we tease them apart and we bucket them into why did this happen? And so these whys will tell, the where might be that it's happening at hospitals, but the why might be multiple reasons. And we break that into what's called a stacked Pareto. And so what I want you to see is this and this are the same data. The difference is we've just broken that big Pareto apart. Now we know why. Remember Ono? He said, if our root cause is off by just a little bit, our countermeasures will be ineffective. Well, now we've got our root causes and we feel good about them. Now we can deliver short-term countermeasures. And how long do we do it? We keep delivering countermeasures till we close that gap. And when that gap is closed, now we know we've solved the problem. This is real problem solving. But there's one more step left. The long term. How do we stop the long-term waste so this never happens again? You see, the short term is about getting my current project back on track. The long term is about making sure it never happens again. We need to do both. And a lot of people who are in innovation don't do great problem solving, and they choose what I call the way of band-aids. They go, they check, they see a gap, they go do some countermeasures. It doesn't work, they do it again. They just put band-aids on things. So we want to do real problem solving, and that's a huge part of it. Now I want to talk to you about one other process in this, which is called 8 minutes at Yamba. This is a way that we can, at scale, go get information from our sales calls. So I want you to look about these orange shapes. Think of them as lenses of filtering and biases that different people have. So, I go out and have 100 people go out and give sales calls where customers turn us down. And they talk to their managers, but it goes through the filtering and biases of the manager. And so maybe the managers pick up on some of the things, but maybe they don't get them all. Like, setup confusing, hard to use, too big, but don't like looks. That one got left out because maybe the manager's bias is that's not that important. Now the manager goes and tells the regional director, excuse me, I'm sorry. These were the sales calls. These are the sales reps. They go out and tell the regional managers, hey, what do? They remember it's the too big. They filter out the other two, the regional managers, and maybe there's a regional manager that just really feels like we need an Internet of Things connection, and that's just a bias that he walks in with. And then by the time he gets to the VP of sales, this filtering is, it's too big and it needs an IoT connection. It looks nothing like what actually happened in the field. And so what we do in 8 Minutes at Gemba is we go and look at every sales call one by one. And you might say, oh, that's so hard. But when you're talking about a product that's just come to market, a lot of times you can manage to keep up with each one of them. And we talk to the salesperson about that call right when it happened, and it takes 8 minutes. That's why we call it 8 Minutes at Gemba. Gemba is Japanese for the place where the action is, or the place where the problem occurs. And so we're able to get Paretos of what's wrong rather than going through all those filters. So this is one of the unique ways that Lean Focus that we teach people to go out and get data in your launch control room. With let's go back to our original tree. Remember our tree? This is that same tree we started with in the beginning. How have we dealt with these root causes? Remember, there was lack of formal team problem solving. Well, now we have structured problem solving. I just showed it to you, right? That whole thing about finding the wheres and then going and doing the stack bar Pareto, creating the countermeasures, running the run chart, meeting every week. We have a structured way to do it. Lack of ability to go to Gemba at scale and to actually, versus talking to a few of my friends or letting everybody filter on up to what the VP of sales says, we've got a structured way using 8 Minutes at Gemba. We can go out and really, it's 8 minutes at Gemba. What if you did 10 a week? It's not a big deal, right? 2 people, it's an hour or 2 a week. At the end of a month, at the end of 2 months, you've got 80 different points on your Pareto chart. You're gonna learn a ton in a tiny amount of time. What about no process to plan the regional launches and other things that we know are gonna come up? Well, Launch Control Room brings in those regional launches and takes ownership for making sure those projects happen, and we keep a team together. No structured mean to measure or drive new product revenue. Well, now we're managing and tracking new product revenue through revenue attainment. So we know how we're doing every day. And then finally, no standards for what we expect in manufacturing or other customer-facing functions. We have no standard for their performance, but because we're measuring it every day and we're seeing how it's affecting customers, now we're actually watching that. And so through using this technique, we're able to change revenue attainment to revenue attainment over 100%. And like I told you, this isn't theoretical. I watched it happen. And what happens, all of these symptoms, we do track our performance against our commitments. We do track gaps. We hit our targets. All of these symptoms turn positive as we resolve the issue. I love Launch Control Room because it takes all that hard work and we make sure that we derive the maximum value for our company, for our shareholders, for our customers, and we also maximize the engagement and job satisfaction of all the people who did all that work. Because as an engineer, I can tell you there's nothing more depressing, and I've done it, than working till 11 o'clock night after night, trying to get a product out and having that product completely fail. And it's so discouraging. And so for me, as an engineer at heart, I love that engagement part. But I don't care who you are in this process, this is going to help you. So let's say that you're interested in taking next steps. What would you like? What are the things that you could do? So this is one of the downloadable sheets that Damon was talking about at the beginning. One thing we can do is I can come to your site, and just before you're going to do a launch, or if you've done a launch recently that's not going well, and both work fine, by the way, we don't have to wait for a new launch. We can come and we can address what's going on right now. Now, one of the things I love about Launch Control Room is it demonstrates results really quickly. So if you have an organization that's just trying to get started in Lean, Launch Control Room can be a great place to start. Why? Because people can see the revenue coming in sometimes in a matter of just a few months. I told you earlier I would give you an example of how we applied Launch Control Room. And I can't give you a lot of details, but I'll give you an overview. It was a MedDev device, and we were doing a device that was implanted into a customer, into a patient. Okay, so we're talking about a highly regulated device here. And we launched this product, I want to say in December, and sales were wretched. We got a couple of orders right in December, and we had a quarterly goal to hit at the end of March, and that quarterly goal was $10 million. Okay, so we were expecting to hit $10 million because we were doing an iteration off of an old product, charging a slight increase, and we had projected that we would get $10 million in the first quarter based on what we knew about the product line. And we weren't getting even half that. And there was a lot of talk at that time, like I told you, it's not a great product. We didn't think about it. We have a lot of issues. This, doctors, physicians don't really want this product. It's not important to them. It wasn't well done. All of that kind of like, let's just go back and do another one. Now, there was a lot of, we could just do another one, and we'll do the next project in a couple of years. It's going to be amazing. But we didn't take that route. We took the Launch Control Room route, and we started doing 8 minutes at Gemba or an earlier form of it, a prototype form of it. And we started learning that salespeople weren't even calling on the customers because they were afraid. If the product didn't work, they don't want to be first. And salespeople are always a little bit nervous about new products. And so by doing 8 minutes at Gemba, we would just get on the phone and say, okay, can you tell us about your most recent sales call? And they would post stuff from like 2 months ago. We didn't do something aggressive like, hey, when was the last time you were showing this and why aren't you showing it? We didn't do that. We always assumed it was a process problem, never a people problem. So we just said, show us your old one. And we got like example after example of people that hadn't shown it to a customer or to a physician in months. So we instituted a small little system that actually measured, and we got people to commit each week that they would go show it to at least 4 customers because that's what we thought we needed. And bam, that problem went away. Remember that picture I showed you with the horse and the gates? Then the next one we came to is we were calling on the wrong kind of physician. We were in a field where there were specialists and there were generalists, and we were calling on the generalists, and we should have been with the specialists, and we didn't know that. But we found one of our sales rep who was doing really well, and we went and we really dug in. Why was that person doing well? We problem solved, and what was really different? And then we took that and we deployed it to the whole organization. Okay, we didn't get to 10 million. We got to 9.89 million. We were never going to get there without Launch Control Room. Same product, we made no changes to the product. We added some literature that really spoke, a little bit of quick literature, like a quick 2-sided one-pager we could hand out in the hallway. And complete success, same product, people were ready to give up. And so I want to just tell you guys, I want to encourage you that by doing Launch Control Room, you can take a product that maybe you don't think has got in it what you need, and you'll find out that it does. So this is how we get started. We can take a product, as I said, that one we really applied Launch Control Room about 6 weeks in. We can also do it for a product that's launching within the next 2 or 3 months, and we can really get ready. I mean, that's ideal. But we just come in a couple of days, we can do this. We have a virtual format if you want to have a heavy sales contribution. I prefer the in-person format, but we can work with either depending on your org. And we'll help you get past these. And we'll do daily management. And so this is where we get started. If you're interested in innovation and how it works at Lean Focus, I do these monthly webinars. I normally do a weekly newsletter. I haven't been doing it the last 3 or 4 weeks because I've been heads down developing some very cool software that we're going to be telling you guys about that also helps with waste. But I've kind of had my head down doing a lot of software development. So this is back a few weeks. I think Damon's going to have a talk with me soon. I got to get this back on track. But generally, every week something comes up that we've learned and that we want to talk about, and it's a 3 or 4 minute read. So I encourage you to go to Innovation Journey, sign up, and then if you really want to get into the details, I've written a couple of books over the past few years, and you might find them interesting. Also, you can come to Lean Focus, and we have all sorts of webinars. We have tons of free information for you, not just in innovation, but in all areas of lean thinking. And I hope you'll visit our site and take advantage of that free information. And then a closing thought that I like to always end with, and Eli Goldratt is one of my heroes. He's really one of the first, he's maybe the first person in a lot of people's mind that really went all in applying lean thinking to innovation and project management. Some people say Don Reinertsen. You know, there's an argument for Don Reinertsen as well. He wrote the book, Develop Products in Half the Time. But I think Eli Goldratt's thinking was more pure lean. So I don't know. People get on both sides of this argument. But I love this. You know, he's in a room, there's a big argument, and I've been in these, right, where people are listening, they're arguing, they're fighting. Oh, well, it's your fault this product didn't launch right. No, it's your R&D did a crappy job on developing the product. No, marketing doesn't even know how to spec a product. And you know, these kinds of things. And I love this slide. He sits back and I start to count. 1, people are good. Every conflict can be removed. Every situation, it's exceedingly simple, no matter how it looks. And you know, I love the last one. There's always a win-win solution. We can problem solve and find our way to a great solution. So with that, I will turn the microphone back over to Damon and see if we have any questions.
Thanks, George. Great job. We have several questions here, which is probably a reflection of the quality of the content. So let's get into it. All right, first question, George. How does this process, launch control room, work for a software-related product? So I think the perception is that these were tangible products. Can you talk about how this may be different with software, if somebody were launching software?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, of course, you know, when you're launching software, the QDC issue on the manufacturing side, it's a lot less important. I won't say it goes completely to zero, because you still have to ship software. You've still got to deal with providing authorization for people to use it. And so there are some manufacturing issues, but they're generally much smaller. The other thing that software does is it really gives you the opportunity for a very low price using video conferencing. You can watch people's experiences. So you don't have to travel to a factory to go to Gemba. Go see where the problem is. So if you notice how we did, we talked a lot about 8 minutes at Gemba. We want to mix in with that visits to customer sites. And when you're doing a software product, one of the things is it's a lot easier to visit a customer and to see their experiences and to build empathy with what they're doing, because you can just do a video call with them and record it. And so, maybe you would trust you. So I would say what would happen is the QDC would go down, the direct Gemba visits would go up, and probably the 8 minutes at Gemba, how our salespeople did and how customers received it would probably stay about the same in software. But exact same principles, exact same kinds of teams, same problem solving, all the other things are pretty much the same, just a matter of a slight redirection of emphasis.
George, would you agree that the volume and sort of difficulty of the types of things that you would deal with post-launch could be minimized with some of the other lean focus tools we have in the innovation suite? So as you think about during product development, what tools exist to make launch control room actually be less susceptible to those types of things? Like I'm thinking user discovery as an example. So if you go back to that model that you created.
Yeah, let's go up and that's a great question, Damon. Let me take you up and show you guys that. So I'm going back up to that very first slide, very early slide that we had, where we showed the whole innovation journey. And Damon, I think that's a great question. You'll remember I said earlier, I've had multiple experiences where we've gotten half of the revenue back. In other words, if we had a gap, we were able, using launch control room, we were able to get about half of it back. So you're not going to normally get, launch control room is not going to get you, it normally doesn't close the full gap if the product has really got some issues. So back in here, you talked about user workflow discovery, really deeply understanding what your customers needed. I gave you the example of the hospital. We didn't really study the hospital. We just went and, we met with our favorite 5 doctors who were in private practice, and we said that's good enough. And then we assumed it would go to the hospital. We didn't really we didn't do a workflow discovery with the hospital. So that's a great example. And if I have a device that's 15 minutes to do a cycle, getting that to 5 minutes, that's probably going to be pretty tough. That may be a whole new product redesign. So to your point, the better we do design, another one is design thinking, which is design thinking is where we're actively building the value prop with the customer and getting a ton of feedback while we're doing it. We're really understanding how we bring value to the customer in that workflow. Another one Damon mentioned is project requirements Kaizen, where we really lock the project down to kill the possibility for scope creep, and which allows us then to get the product out on time. Because a lot of times if you come out late and your competitor comes out before you actually launch, but you would have beat the competitor, that can be another gap that's very hard to close with Launch Control Room. So I think
that tool does a great job of tracing every market requirement to a product requirement, flowing it all the way through to the project execution, which then, to your point, you don't get the scope creep that you just mentioned.
Exactly.
Okay, thanks. Another question. Hello, George. It was great to learn about Launch Control Room today. The companies that I've been in consider launch as a commercial event and pass on the responsibilities of that phase to an account or a product manager. Sound familiar? Today's main learning is about the process involved and how much coordination is required. The project should extend the involvement of the cross-functional team until the launch is successfully completed and revenue achieved. Is this correct?
Exactly. Now, it may not be the full team. Let's say you have a project team that's 25 people. Your Launch Control Room team might be a representative set of that, but it might be 6. So let me give you an example, Dame, I think might help. Like, you don't need, let's say I'm doing a product that has lots of kinds of engineering, optical, electrical, mechanical. I don't need every one of those people in Launch Control Room, but I need somebody from R&D, because when we run into a problem, we need to know immediately, is this a technical issue we've run into? And you typically want that very quick communication connection back down to R&D so that you can resolve that within a day. And so, yeah, I would just say to any company that did that, I would just say that's how people used to treat project management. They used to say, oh, when we're developing the project, that's R&D, and they do that, and then they hand off to marketing when we launch. I think people have generally accepted that cross-functional teams are necessary in development, and you very rarely see this pure R&D development team anymore. You did it a lot, say 20 years ago. But today, people are applying the same flawed thinking to launching. And I would say take that same thinking you've done in cross-functional projects and just apply it to cross-functional launching.
Thank you. Okay, next question. Don't most companies already have a quality and delivery monitoring mechanism in operations? This seems like a duplication of effort. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, that's a stumbling block for a lot of companies because they think that, but don't be fooled. You see, when your VP of Ops comes in and says what the quality report is, they are generally trying to drive PPM, or if it's OTD, they're trying to drive the percentage of OTD to 100%, or PPM, they're trying to drive it down. But they're looking at everything they make. When you do a new product, you don't substantially contribute to that number because you're such a new product that your volumes are low. And so what happens
lost
is,
in the noise.
Sorry?
Signals lost in the noise of everything else that's already been launched.
Exactly. So you've got to tease that data out. And it's the same for revenue. You've got to tease out, how am I doing with this revenue for this product? You can't just look at overall revenue. It's the exact same problem.
Yeah, and you could miss a really big sleeping giant because it's masked early on.
That's exactly what happens. You have this quality chaos going on in the product, but nobody really expects much revenue. A year later, the product's gone nowhere. And we were expecting it now to be contributing revenue, but it's not because it never got to grow.
Okay. This one is regarding sort of the standard work and cadence around reporting. So we already get weekly reports on revenue for new products. How is this different?
I see a lot of people getting weekly reports, and they typically get some kind of a snapshot out of like SAP or Oracle. Here's the problem with that. We always want to have trend. And that snapshot has been so misleading. That's the first thing we did in our launch control room in that example I was telling you about, is we built something so we could see how are we doing week after week. Because you look at trend, this week Kansas is down, next week California is down. What is it? How do I know what that means? Because I can't remember what all the reports were for all the different regions of the country, or however it is you're looking at it. So by having a run chart like what we showed you in the problem solving, we can actually see how it's been going, and we filter out the noise, and we really get the big picture.
George, would you recommend that presidents, CEOs, P&L leaders be participants in some shape, form, or capacity in launch control room? And if so, what's your suggestion there?
Absolutely. Most people are getting together with their senior staff, let's say once a month. Why not just take 10 minutes and look at our revenue attainment for all the products we launched in the last 2 years? That is a 10-minute look. You can put it on a single piece of paper. That way, your senior leadership has the ability to look and say, I want to know what's going on there. I want to have a separate meeting. We're going to drive that one. That project's important to us, that sort of thing.
Okay. Well, that's the hour, George. Great job. It went really fast. I learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone else did as well. So just a reminder, today's presentation will be recorded, and you will receive an email to the email address that you used to register for this webinar. And if you do not receive the recording, just drop us an email at info@leanfocus.com, and we'll get you sent in the right direction. Thank you all for participating, and we look forward to seeing you on another session. Take care and have a great rest of your day and week. And thank you, George. All the best. Bye now.
Thanks a lot, everybody.